So last time, we had breakout rooms, and thank you so much for those who have given me feedback. I have learned several points, how to better structure those Wednesday sessions, and I've also discussed it with Jennifer, and I think, it was really helpful input. And over the next Wednesday sessions, I would like to, share with you about the canonical list of the Four Vipallasa, to talk about those and take them as basically as a framework for the sharing. And I'm now gonna screen share it also in, so we can go over it one more time, and you also can download it for yourselves to, look into that over the weeks as we are going through the Vipallasa. And there's in particular one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya of the Fours, and it's called Vipallasa Sutta, translated as Distortions. And in this sutta, the Buddha describes the fourfold distortion of perception, sanya, mind, citta, and view, ditti, because those distortions, they occur on 3 levels. And I want to go more into detail about that. But first, just the basics is the first distortion of perception, seeing what is impermanent, anicca, as permanent, nicca. Seeing what is painful, dukkha, as pleasant, sukha. Seeing what is without a self, anatta, as a self, atta. And seeing what is not beautiful, asubha, as beautiful, subha. And as I also said already a couple of times, if the Buddha would be alive today, I think he would have most likely added a 5th Vipallasa. Seeing what is part of the web of life as separate from the web of life. I think that would definitely be a very good addition to those 4 Vipallasa, for today's messy situation. And generally speaking, in order to dissolve the Vipallasa, we need to learn to move through perceived, conditioned limitations in order, to open up and expand perception and expand the mind. And that's kind of, the basic attempt, which I am sharing with you on those Wednesday sessions, to expand perception in the service of wisdom and compassion, in the service of life. And that can only happen if we are fully with our experience, inside of what's called the 4 Satipatthana, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, and not escaping into something else, escaping into thinking about how it would be if it would be different, or how it would be somewhere else, or how it would be if I wouldn't have said this. But to really be with the experience, and through being with our direct experience, we change. Because direct experience is the most powerful teacher. And these different escape routes, they are generally called in the Buddhist teaching the 5 hindrances, or the 5 nivarana. And literally translated, the word nivarana means simply wrong wanderings. So if we allow the mind under this influence of the wrong perception to wander down those different avenues about, projecting out the discomfort onto others, or, blaming ourselves and whatever, our parents, our colleagues, rather than being with the experience as it is. And I know this is not easy. It's actually difficult, because discomfort is difficult to bear. But that is how it works, this is how the teaching works. Because those, those hindrances, which are stemming basically from this Vipallasa, they are spinning a whole net of confusion around experience. And then experience retreats more and more from a direct relationship into some kind of, crazy thinking, and it can become so entrenched, that we lose more and more touch. And in a big way, our capitalist consumer culture has lost touch to the limitations of planetary life to such an extent that we are, on the brink of extinction, as a species, if we are not waking up to that, and have brought already so many other species to extinction. And, there's not a lot of interest from a lot of people to speak about it or to think about it, because it's very uncomfortable and scary, So these distortions of perception occur on 3 levels of depths, and those levels are not necessarily hierarchical, but rather mutually supportive, in creating these webs of delusion. So the first and the most superficial one, and I'm sure you have observed it in your own lives, is the level on perception, sanya in Pali. And perception, remembers and recognizes distinguishing features of an object. So, for example, if we go for a walk in the forest and there's a long, dark thing on the ground, and for a moment you think it's a snake, and the body contracts. And then you look again and, oh, it's just a long stick. It just looked like a snake. So that's a distortion of perception on that level. And so because the process, is simplified, so that because of danger, that we can immediately, get away from there without contemplating for a long time. So that's distortion of perception on that level, and it's karmically conditioned. And for example, what for a vulture could be a good meal, a rotten kind of corpse. A vulture would really love that. Whereas a human being feels really, doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So, it's not that all species on this planet look with the same mind about what is being experienced, but for us, it's like this. And it can be confused. And another really kind of more really sad example, alarming example, is, for example, that in America, many people of color, are in prison, in particularly black people, because the police is just very, very easily, frightened. And if black people, pull out a wallet, people think it's a gun. Whereas if a white person pulls out a wallet, it's a wallet. So that distortion of perception comes from this deep-seated fear. And it's tragic, really. It has vast repercussions. And then we come to the next level, which is on the level of thinking, on the level of the mind, chitta. As we perceive something, then, thoughts get stirred up. For example, thoughts of fear, oh my God, there's so many snakes in this forest. I don't know if I should go. Maybe I should go home. Or, getting really kind of all riled up. But then if let's say we continue walking, and then the thoughts start to peter out and we forget about it again. So that's the next level. And then the third level is on the level of view. In Pali, that's called ditti. So, for example, developing a certain kind of deep-seated phobia or a deep-seated fear. And even in the face of evidence, we still can't let go of it. That's just fundamentalism, for example. And then polarization happens. And then, for example, in America, I don't know the numbers right now, but a vast amount of the prison population is black. Even, the number of black people in the global, in the complete population in America is much, much, much less than the percentage in prisons. So there's obviously a huge distortion going on that this happens. So thoughts make views, and then perception is built on these views because we see what we expect. And this is why the mind training is so very, very important. And you can, there's really very simple examples. The example with the snake, I have experienced that at least 2 or 3 times in my life, where my body would just tense up. Or, for example, sometimes I go down the street and then I think, oh, this is my friend over there. And then I look again and actually she looks quite similar, but not the same. So, because, Sanya just picks up certain features in order to make a quick decision for safety. It's an evolutionary protection. And it has advantages and disadvantages. And the Buddha's teaching helps us to get a handle on the confusing part of that. And the Buddha, is on record for having said, in regards to true happiness, we perceive things wrongly, all the while thinking we are seeing them correctly. And that's, the Vipallasas. And I mentioned it, I think, last time, that the word Vipallasa comes from Vipariasa, which literally means turned upside down. And, and as I've talked about several times, or more than that, even often, that more and more, us overeducated, Western educated people, starting to realize that our Western consumer cultures are actually not as advanced as we once thought we were. And there's more and more interest, in indigenous ways of looking, because it starts to become more and more clear, that indigenous ways of looking at life on this planet with respect for other species, with an openness to learn from other species and relate to Earth as a living, intelligent being, is actually a very sustainable way of living, in compared to, extracting from the planet and constantly just seeing what we can take from it. That's also a distortion of perception with huge repercussions. And I remember, when I started to travel in my early 30s to Thailand in particular, but also later on I was also in India, Nepal. There were many of the young men, at least, wearing T-shirts about they want to go to America, they all want to be like the Americans. But I don't think those T-shirts are selling that good anymore these days. Because I hear also more and more that people are really starting to realize that, that that their cultures have a lot to offer. I just recently listened to an interview with the the reincarnation of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who is the grandfather of my Tibetan teacher, Shetchen Rabcham Rinpoche. And he was saying, he's at the moment he's making a film actually about how life was in Kathmandu, in the 80s or in the 90s, when, Western stuff wasn't yet so much, hadn't arrived there. It has already started a little bit, but the old ways were still much more intact than they are now. And, he has a real interest. He's just, I think, in his late 20s, a real interest in reminding young people about that. To have a pride in one's earth-based ways of looking, because they're actually sane and they're actually in accordance with reality. In reality, of living on a planet like this. Yes, and then I just would like to end the reflection with a little quote from the scriptures. And that's a certain quote, which happens to be mentioned at the end of suttas quite regularly. So that, the person who came to the teacher, who came to the Buddha, who is here is called Master Gautama, who came to the Buddha, and then afterwards he got a teaching from the Buddha, or she got a teaching from the Buddha, and then the sutta ends like this. When this was said, the person who had received the teaching said to the Blessed One, "Magnificent Master Gautama, magnificent Master Gautama. The Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go for refuge to Master Gautama and to the Dharma and to the Sangha. From today, let Master Gautama remember me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life. The Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what had been turned upside down, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark with eyesight to see forms, for those with eyesight to see forms." So that relates actually to the Vipallasa also. So that list, of these four Vipallasa is a very powerful scaffolding, to hold on if we don't know where to start with the practice. This is very, very basic. So let's now shift to the meditation and find a posture you can sustain for a good almost 40 minutes. And sensing the body on the cushion on the chair. And what you're bringing here today, you're tired, or maybe you are a little bit excited, or maybe you're just a little bit stressed because you came in last second, or whatever it is. It's just what it is. It mightn't be necessarily the most comfortable feeling, but that is okay. Because we can only start where we are right now, not somewhere else. And meditation is about that, to connect with direct present moment experience, with the intention to be taught by that direct experience, including aversion and greed and anything, but which is there as all food for learning. What that does, how that feels, if that is opening us up or if it's contracting us. Just noticing that. And that's, what expansion of perception is all about, to just notice the whole situation. Not just what we feel or what we think, but the whole experience. So resting as the knowing of what is there. Awareness. And then sensing the weight of the body. The gentle pull of gravity as we are experiencing it with these bodies, these earth bodies. Just allowing the tensions to just drain out, drain down into the ground beneath where we are sitting. And by looking at our experience in a different way than usual, that allows us for the mind to open and see our world also differently. And that's what we need to train in. If we want to respond, to what's going on the planet. And it's a multi-generational work, of course, but somebody needs to start. Can be as well us. responding to that calling which we can feel in our bones, that something new needs to be integrated. We can't continue to move the checks, the deck chairs on the Titanic. We need to do something more deep. And it's calling us. And practice is to open to the calling. And in our case, we are using the Buddha's teaching as a support to make space for that calling to land in us and change us. So be more capable to respond. In our different ways, depending on what comes through. And it's not a quick fix. It is what it is. And Bioaccumulafa, who I have mentioned already a few times, he speaks about paying attention to the cracks. The cracks where we definitely can see that what is, for example, expressed by the Buddha as the Vipallasa. That's a crack, a very clear crack, in the world views, which can be quite easily pinned down and pointed out, where we are getting lost. So that those cracks, they help us to open up perception, open up the mind. They are opportunities if we are handling them in a growthful way. The Buddha compares that, with grasping a snake. You have to grasp the snake at the head, not at the tail. If you grasp at the tail, she's going to bite you. But if you grasp her in the right way, she can't bite you. And the list of the Four Vipallasa is grasping the snake at the head and looking in her eyes and seeing. Okay. Just recognizing the cracks. That's the beginning. And then, allowing that which comes through the cracks to land in us and change us. And not with the head, not with the intellect, but with the body. And the body knows how to do this. The body remembers wholeness and knows how to regulate itself in relation to that knowing. So there's this, innate dynamic of the energy body, of our quote unquote energy body, and the vast body of the earth. And what we need to do is to give it space, that attunement process. Give it the space it needs to happen, basically. The attunement process. From domination and human supremacy to participation. That's coming down, It's coming down from some ideas which are just ideas, and they are no longer up to the job to continue building sustainable systems here. So from the ground up, listening to what we belong to on this basis of the elements, earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, space element. Allowing that innate wisdom to do the work by giving it the space it needs. And developing the tolerance, to feel the confusion, feel the discomfort, or whatever is coming. And finding safety in our purpose rather than in pleasant feeling. What about that? So now we can just sit for some time quietly and be with the direct experience of that energetic attunement process. If we open our minds, our hearts to be met in this way. And, as a helpful instruction, maybe, like listening into the spaciousness, listening into the silence, while also being aware of the body and listening with the body rather than listening with the head, with the ears. The ears are also part of the body, but there's much more than just ears or brain. It's a whole unit, like a satellite dish in the shape of a human body. And whenever we notice that the mind wanders off into thinking, just simply letting that go and coming back to sensing the energy body sitting and breathing in and breathing out, and limitless space within which this body sits. The space which isn't lacking of anything, it's a fullness of potential. Not as advanced as we once thought we were. And allowing that to just sink in with a lot of kindness. And that's how immaturity presents, to overestimate oneself. That's okay, that's part of the learning. But when the time comes, without further ado, just put it down. and getting ready to move on from that. And the current president of the United States is not capable to do things like that. That's clear. He wants to be Jesus Christ, and what else? I don't know. But that's madness, really. That's like the peak of the expression of resistance if you want to be Jesus Christ. There's lots of Jesus Christs in the mental hospitals here and in Europe too, I'm sure. That's the distortion of perception by excellence. If it wouldn't be that dangerous, it'd be funny, really. So these kind of challenges, they can really bring out the best of our human potential if we meet them in the right way. They can be a blessing. And in Austrian German we have a word for blessure. It's called blessure. It comes from the French, and it means in French it means wound. It's used for student fraternities in Austria who are fighting, have ritual fighting, and they have certain wounds they really kind of consider as a sign of courage, and they're called blessure, and it's the same root as the word blessing. So an opening for greater knowledge and deeper humanity to emerge into us. And that's what the Buddhist teaching is, one teaching which gives us support to allow that process to happen and to not get carried away into identification too much and allow the process to do what it needs to do. Give it the space, the healing. Allow the healing to take place and not manipulating it. But work in unison with the laws of nature as they present in the body and the mind of us, as a human being and also the body of the planet. And the humility and respect that requires to come down, from this old view of human supremacy. And then if things don't go the way we want them to go, just pretend we are Jesus Christ, so that we are something big, something important, because we just don't want to face it. That's silly. So coming back to the body again and again, as we are finding our way out of the old paradigm based on an assumption of, original sin, and coming back to indigenous ways of looking, speaking about original beauty. And just taking a deep breath and letting that old way of looking just be recycled. It just doesn't work very well anymore. And seeing the challenge as a blessing, because without that challenge, there's not enough interest.